What a great pleasure for the Kiros Report to have decided to invest its 1 hour on two important thinkers who are doing fundamental work in the areas of criminal justice, in the case of Noelle, who is a well-known attorney, barred in the state of Pennsylvania, a graduate of Stanford University and Boston University, and of course, the regular contributor, Professor Victor Wallis, who is a professor of political science and an equally renowned editor of a famed journal, Socialism and Democracy, which he edited for about 30 years or so. So the Kiros Report is then determined and pleased to think with this two greats on a very important theme of our time, namely the human condition of mumia, among many other things which I intend to explore with them. So we'll get on the program immediately, and my guests need not be given longer introductions, which they deserve, because I prefer to spend the time on content as opposed to form. Welcome to the Kiros Report.
Thank you, Teodros.
Thank you.
So what I thought I would do is begin with Noelle, the attorney. Take your time. The time is yours, and make a detailed case for why the Kiros Report should invest 1 hour on the fate of Mumia.
Really, if you're looking at public intellectuals and people who have their pulse on the United States situation right now, which is in great flux and which the people have to really rise to meet the occasion of looming and enduring fascism, we need Mumia Abu-Jamal. He's an imprisoned U.S. political prisoner, public intellectual. And it's this kind of insight and reporting and deeply understanding the fault lines of the U.S. and its history and its future that your audience needs to really privilege. Like Mumia Abu-Jamal reaches us. He is a radio journalist reporting from behind bars. He's done 43 years in a Pennsylvania prison for the murder of a Philadelphia police officer. He is most likely innocent and he was framed for the crime. But he was targeted because of his intellectual capacity, because he was reporting from North Philadelphia, because he was reporting at a time when the US was choosing which country it was going to be and which forces were going to repress the working class. And we need his voice. So I think that's why Mumia is important, because he's part of our intellectual cadre. He's a comrade. He's somebody that we need to be in conversation with. And his circumstances, the fact that we have political prisoners in the United States, is very revealing to our conditions, and we have to resist. We have to resist at every level and make this country what we need it to be. And that is why I'm in solidarity with Mumia Abu-Jamal. That's why I became a lawyer. I'm working on his criminal case. I believe there will be relief. I believe in freedom. And part of the struggle for people to join it, when we can win a case like this, it's super important. It shows the state that we have capacity, that we are never leaving anyone behind, and that a new future is possible. And so there are moments in history when people have been released that are very formative. And Mumia Abu-Jamal's release, which I believe in, is going to be one of those.
Thank you so much. Now, how about you, Victor? My impression, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you've been unofficially working with political prisoners for many, many years in your career, almost during the entire time that I have befriended you, which is over 30 years. Let's talk about why you do that. Why is this work so important to you? And why does Mumia figure in it prominently?
Yeah, actually, my communication with prisoners has gone on for 50 years. It started when I was in Indianapolis. They were not political prisoners in the sense that's usually understood, whereby people are arrested and jailed for their political activities, but they are people who are interested in politics and committed to politics, committed to revolutionary politics. They were, as are many, and most of the prisoners I've been in contact with have been African American, and as are many African American males, they're caught up in the criminal justice system because of economic reasons, essentially. So, and that was the case with my longest term friend, Hugh Lyons, whom I met back in 1973, who died a few years ago, and who was in and out of prisons in Indiana. But he was a committed revolutionary, but he was not what's typically characterized as a political prisoner. Um, I've known some political prisoners also, but in a sense, all prisoners in the United States are political in the sense that their circumstances that put them there reflect something about the political nature of the country and the great increase in mass incarceration or the development of mass incarceration that took place after the 1970s. So, and some of the individuals that I've known in that context have become politically educated while in prison. Others were already so before they went in there. But so my initial contact, it was just, in a sense, by chance. I mean, living in Indianapolis, where I lived and taught for many years, in the early 70s, I initially met three very active prisoners through a person who was working at the time with the local affiliate of Martin Luther King's organization. It was the Indiana Christian Leadership Conference. And he introduced me to three men who had just recently been released from the Indiana prisons and who wanted to be part of a Marxist study group. So that's how I initially became in contact. And so one of them, that is Hugh Lyons, ended up back in prison for economic reasons and became an organizer in the prison there and so on. So, but I mean, my other contacts, they've developed really as a product also of my intellectual and political work, because apart from the ones I had in Indiana at that time, I later got a whole additional set of contacts as a result of my work editing Socialism and Democracy, because I got a letter from a prisoner in Illinois. This was in 1999, I think, who was in a supermax prison and who just wrote to me in my capacity as editor about his terrible conditions. And then he in turn put me in touch with an organizer in Chicago, and who in turn put me in touch with Kevin Rashid Johnson, who is still a prisoner now. He is another example of someone who was politically conscious, but was in prison for so-called social reasons, accused of killing a cop. But him I've remained in touch with ever since, and he put me in touch with many other people. And I later got in touch with more through writing about my prison experience or experience with prisoners. Not that I've been in prison. I've visited many prisons, but haven't been there. But I wrote about it in the San Francisco Bayview, which is a national Black newspaper, and that generated more letters. So I've had, in effect, a lot of correspondence with prisoners over many years, based on common political interests, common interests in transforming this society. And the ways in which the different prisoners came to that view differed in many cases, but in all cases, it's been a very important motivating factor for my interaction with them.
Wonderful. And now back to you, Noel. I would like us to have a portrait of Mumia. Give me an image of him as you have known him, as a human being, as a prisoner, and most importantly, which is the second part of the question, did he commit the crime or not? Make a legal case. in the event that you think he didn't?
You're muted, Noelle.
Mumia is an amazing, warm, gracious person who was raised by Lavinia Cook and William Cook. And he grew up in North Philadelphia. He was very gregarious. He went around the community, visited a lot of churches, was very curious as a young person, very studious. He began his political education in the Black Panther Party. He was trying to change the name of his high school to Malcolm X High School from Ben Franklin High. He grew up in Philadelphia. He went to college at Goddard College in Vermont, and he met people from all over the world and was very inspired by that journey. And he then became a journalist and a writer, and an excellent one. He was hired by WHYY, which is the founding station for National Public Radio in the United States. He had a career writing and doing commentaries and reporting for many different outlets in Philadelphia. And when he was 26 years old, he was supplementing his income by driving a cab. And he came across a scene where a police officer was beating his brother. And he ran across the scene and he was shot. So Mumia Abu-Jamal, someone the state knew as who was an investigative journalist who had the bright white hot spotlight on the notorious Rizzo administration, a notorious police chief who was brutal, who reported from the Black community and told their stories on a national stage. He reported nationally on these issues. He ran across the street and was shot. And so because he was shot and lying on the ground, they framed him for this murder. I am one of Mumia Abu-Jamal's criminal defense attorneys. I'm also an attorney that works on his medical cases. And I have been aware of the case now for many years, and I've worked with him as a publisher and a journalist for decades, since 1992. So in all of that time and experience, and now working on the case, I am firmly convinced that Mumia Abu-Jamal did not shoot Officer Faulkner and that he's been railroaded, partly because of his voice, partly because of what he meant to the community. We are now developing and reinvestigating the entire case. He has had many years of appeals. The local courts are incredibly corrupt. I will just give you one example.
Please.
There's the cab driver who's the only person that the prosecution said saw him shoot the police officer and saw the whole scene. Robert Chobert is this guy's name. The very first photos that were discovered a couple years ago, the Polikoff photos that were in the Philadelphia Bulletin, this is before the police crime scene photos. Those very first photos show that Robert Chobert's cab was not where he said it was. He was supposedly sitting in this cab and saw the whole thing right behind the police car. There was no cab there. 10 minutes after the shooting, there was no cab there. So that same individual was never told to the jury that he had 2 DUI convictions. He was on probation, and he also did not have a license to drive that cab, and he was negotiating with the prosecutor to get his license back. They also didn't tell them that he was on probation for literally throwing a Molotov cocktail into a school for pay and trying to burn it down. That was ruled that wasn't a crime of false, which means it wasn't a fraudulent crime where somebody lied. So it wasn't allowed to be used against him at trial. This guy, it was discovered 40 years later that he had written a letter that was suppressed by the prosecution to the district attorney 3 weeks after the trial. The note said, "Hey, I've been trying to get a hold of you. I want to make sure I get my money. I want to get back with you because you owe me money." That is exactly the type of Brady evidence, which is the name of a U.S. Supreme Court case, suppressed evidence by the prosecution that could have been used to impeach him, that he was paid for his testimony. This was ruled by the local common police court judge to be not material, meaning that it wouldn't have changed the jury's verdict. But in fact, it would have. So there's a lot of corruption going on in the local courts against Mumia Abu-Jamal. partly because it's a police officer, but also partly because of who Mumia is and who Mumia was then. So I am going to make the case that Mumia Jamal should be free, not just having a new trial, that he should be free. I'm working as an attorney now to do that, and we're investigating the case from top to bottom.
How long have you been at it now?
I met Mumia in July of 1992, and we recorded the commentaries for National Public Radio that were then censored by Senator Bob Dole. We sold them to National Public Radio, and Bob Dole got up on the Senate floor and threatened NPR's funding. Now, things would be different for NPR today if they had resisted that censorship then. They should have resisted the censorship at that time, and they wouldn't be in this pickle they're in now. So, but that said, he was censored. His first book came out. I liberated it from prison, and we have been working together since July of 1992.
Incredible. Am I right to sense a profound similarity between his case and that of Shakur lately? It appears that the conditions under which they are imprisoned seem to be quite similar. She too was accused of doing something like what Mumia supposedly did.
You know, if you're speaking of Asada Shakur, who just passed, I visited Mumia Abu Jamal today. I'm standing on a mountain outside of the prison in a parking lot. I brought to him the New York Times article about Asada, which was very well done. So they're contemporaries. And Asada was able to be liberated from prison, escaped from prison after she had been convicted after 8 trials. She had beat every trial into the last one and likely innocent of that crime. And then she escaped to Cuba. So she's been living in freedom in Cuba ever since that trial happened. But she's a contemporary of Mumia.
Well, back to you, Victor. What would you like to add to this remarkable narrative that Noel gave us in such a short period of time? Precise.
Well,
What
I learned about Mumia's case actually in 1995 in a lecture by Howard Zinn that he gave at Boston University. Howard Zinn called my attention to Mumia's case, and that's it was from then that I got in touch with Noelle, and I've known her since then, and I've supported her efforts, supported prison radio, and very much see his case as a kind of indication of the lengths to which a corrupt establishment in the form of the Philadelphia Police Department will go to take reprisals against someone who has been an embarrassment to them because of his work as a journalist. So they had an interest in framing him because he was a journalist, and they had such a tremendous this tremendously powerful force that kept their narrative as the dominant one. And so it's a classic case of where it's been an uphill fight all the time and still going on to get him his freedom. So I've been in support of that.
And now what I would like to do is something I have never done before. I would like you, the two of you, to get into a conversation about Mumia and most importantly, why we have so many prisoners in the US. Just a back and forth conversation between the two of you.
Well, I really want to ask Victor. Hey, Victor, you've seen in your lifetime this development of mass incarceration. How do you think that affects the ability of people to define their own political relationships to the state and their own ability to invest in the things that we need to invest in, or to unionize, or to self-determination? Like, certainly not the self-determination for the 2.3 million people from the inner cities who are poor, Black, and brown generally. But what about the whole culture not being able to realize its potential?
Well, first of all, the numbers affected by it are much more than the numbers who are in prison at any one time. So it has a tremendous effect. I mean, if you consider, if you multiply that by the numbers of family members of each of the individuals, if you consider also all those who have been through the system and who are still suffering its consequences, because once they get out of prison, they still are put at tremendous disadvantage, both in reintegrating themselves economically into the society and in terms of a lot of discrimination against them, including even, for example, uh, uh, obstacles to their having the right to vote in countries. So we're talking about tens of millions of people who are directly affected by this. And I would add to that the cultural impact of the prisons themselves. I mean, the cruelty that's inflicted at so many levels, especially in the high security prisons, where people are subjected to continuous, well, in some cases, beatings by the guard. In other cases, you have this phenomenon, for example, of collective punishment. So this is an article that Kevin Rashid Johnson has just written, very interesting article about how when one prisoner commits an infraction, the prison administration will punish an entire cell block. And so by punishing an entire cell block or an entire prison for the infraction of one individual, they create a climate of hostility among the prisoners themselves, because they turn the prisoners themselves into snitches in a way, that they because the prisoners then have an interest in finding out who did something, or that it creates that kind of phenomenon. That's just one example, and I'm not saying that kind of thing exists in every prison, but it exists in the highest security prisons. But I think the background point that needs to be mentioned is that until the 1970s, the percentage of people locked up in the United States was not that different from the percentage locked up in other countries. It mushroomed after the 1970s. And this was really, I think, a kind of response to the activism, especially of the Black community in the previous period, especially the Black Panther Party. Part of the response to that, or even the essential part of the response to that, was to break up the Black community, to inject the drugs into the Black community, to use that as a pretext to increase the police presence, and to establish new laws which provided extraordinarily long sentences for people convicted of drug offenses. So that created a huge increase in the prison population. And as I said, with the millions of people directly affected by it. And so it has its spin-off. It creates a kind of culture, or perpetuates a culture of violence and cruelty.
I'm thinking that there was a need for this capitalist culture, this economy, to control the people who were going to demand work and bread and opportunity. And when people are engaged in their liberation struggles throughout the 60s and 70s, there was a backlash in terms of how to prevent the cities from demanding work when they were deindustrializing, or when they were offshoring, or when they were trying to commodify, all of the work in a way that they, I would say it's like a huge Berceros program, for the border. It's like they literally capture and bring into prison, because our Constitution allows for slavery in prison. The United States Constitution allows slavery if you are duly convicted of a crime. And so it was a way to do that. And then once they got this massive level of people that they no longer had to provide for in terms of jobs and bread and opportunities, they started commodifying them. So that means that every part of the prison system extracts wealth from the families and the communities and the prisoners. And so Victor and I have long fought to, make a difference within the commissary system, because they don't feed people enough. So people have to be sent money to get food. And then the people who they buy the food from are like their, corrupt brothers. There's telephone companies are incredibly large and have contracts. The healthcare is not provided. There's a lot of corruption that happens in this population. And then even it is part of the law in Pennsylvania that if you go to prison, you lose your representation, not just your vote, but your representation, your census status gets transferred to the county that you are imprisoned in, often rural counties, and they get more representation. They get more Congress people because they have 7,000 prisoners in this county, Frackville County. Um, they get more representation. They count you with and steal your representation. Now, when you get out and you get out on parole, they keep that representation. So in every possible way, they are in Philadelphia. We all know it's been in the papers. Krasner said it. The city council said it. The police budget is near $1 billion, $900 million a year. And the police want to make overtime, so they just arrest poor and Black people so that they can get the overtime bump the next day. But everybody knows it's a corrupt game. It's corruption that they know they're falsely arresting people, but they have no ability to fight it. So for decades, so I asked the city council person's legislative director, Kenyatta Johnson's legislative director, what's going on with police overtime? And he said, oh, we know. They just have to pay their Jersey mortgages and we can't stop it. And they have to, get the pay bump at the last part of their career so that they get a bigger retirement salary, pension. And the 6,500 police officers currently employed by the city of Philadelphia, the 6,500 who are retired, they are like majority white, working class, jackboot sons of Rizzo who are milking the system at every possible time. It's graft upon graft upon graft. And our city is incapable of funding its schools and fixing potholes because we're spending $900 million a year on a police force that is oppressing the community, not supporting the community.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean the corruption is just unbelievable. I just underscore and bring out one of the points you were alluding to earlier about the representation, because the in states like Virginia, which is where I have many contacts, um, the vast majority of the prisoners are from the urban areas in the east. The prisons themselves are in the rural areas, especially in the west. So, and the practice is that in terms of representation, the prisoners are counted toward the population in the areas where the prisons are located, and not in and where they have no vote, and are not counted in the areas that they come from. So you get a disproportionate funding, let's say, in the areas where the prisons are located, and not in the areas the prisoners come from. Another thing that I wanted to mention that as a kind of separate thing is the increasing obstruction of communication between prisoners and the outside society. All the increasing rules that are imposed on the pretext of fighting against drugs, and the drugs get into the prison really through the guards, through kind of corrupt guards, but instead they're accused of getting them in there through the mail, and so this has led to extraordinary increase in obstruction of mail communication, so that typically you have cases in which, in order to write to a prisoner in one state, you have to send a letter to another state where the letter is photocopied, and all the prisoner gets is the photocopy. All this on the tremendous sort of roundabout thing, adding a lot to the cost of administration and so on, and creating more sort of opportunity. Well, it's commodifying the process and creating more opportunities for profit making, just as they do with the phone system, the communication system. So it's all a great it's a great scam that's built up around the prison themselves. And of course, another whole dimension that we haven't touched on yet is the private prison system, which is set up especially for those who are held, for immigrants who are held, who are not even charged with a crime, and who are put in these privately run prisons, where these conditions are even worse than in those that are subject to some kind of governmental supervision. So the whole thing is tremendously corrupt.
Hmm. Allow me to join in your conversation and throw at you one question that I would like us to think through, namely this idea that Angela Davis and others are working on, the abolition of prisons. Is that too idealistic, or is it something that human beings could fight for? It may not happen immediately, but perhaps the generations to come.
I think it's moral imperative, it's a political imperative, it's a human rights imperative that we roll back the expansion of prisons to what it was 50 years ago. Like that we at least are on par with what other countries do. I mean, I went and got my master's at Boston University because I wanted to understand what was happening. I felt like I was in a boiling pot of water throughout the last 30 years. And it's clear that no other country on earth does this. Like, you cannot exist as a culture and care about humanity, care about your people, care about healthcare with this level of incarceration, this dehumanization that's taking place. And it's completely insane. So abolition is imperative. We have to completely change the system. There needs to be a revolution. This is not like no tinkering with the machinery of death would be my position. And fundamentally, it has to happen. It has to, there's no slow way to fix this. Any liberal or democratic tinkering is just an apologist for the same system. The any opposition party that exists in the United States that's at the table is just collaborators, just a little bit, tiny bit right of center. And the current administration is far right, and these are mid right.
Mhm. If I can push this to the philosophical plane
Of
and
abolition,
make.
of course, the what one really wants is a society in which the crime doesn't occur. And in order to abolish prisons, you have to do away with the conditions that bring them about. I don't see the abolition of prisons as being separate from the larger challenge to transform the society, to create a different kind of society that's not run on the basis of, uh, of profit, which creates a tremendous wealth at one end and tremendous poverty at the other end, and all kinds of psychic, let's say, illnesses, mental illnesses, and all kinds in between. So it has
Like,
to.
we need free healthcare and a guaranteed income.
We need all that, all those things in order to, you have to do away with crime in order to do away with prisons, and also I think in the course of the transformation itself, the you might say that some kind of confinement or punishment might be merited by those who have made a killing off off the existing society. How are you going to transform the society without, in some way, uh, uh, let's say, altering just the power balance between the different classes of the society. There are criminals in positions, in high positions of power in this society. They're the criminals who are not in the prison, or not even part of the incarcerated system. What how how does the transition from one system to another take place? And so in the course of that, it's it's hard to imagine there not being some kind of confinement or process of re-education or something of that sort. So it's a complicated question. The abolition of prisons is linked up inseparably with the total transformation of society, and it can't be done ahead of time, you might say, which is sometimes the illusion that's created by just the call for abolition if it comes isolated from this whole other set of considerations.
Mhm. It is my understanding, with a limited empirical evidence that I can't swear by, based on reading, that there have been societies, such as that of Kemet, I learned, that did not have prisons, which means that the ideal of asking for the abolition of prisons might not have anything to do with what some people call the dark part of human nature, as it does with a particular decision that power holders made to make prisons.
You
And
can even say, if pardon me for interrupting, but you can say that the development of this model of culture and society and criminal policy is criminogenic. It has caused crime. The way in which this level of criminology has progressed only in the US causes more murders, causes more violent crimes, causes more drug addiction. This practice is not been examined as causing it. And there are a vast number of other societies that do not have the level of this problem. So you can't make a change without acknowledging that it caused it. The way in which they policed it caused it.
so, if I understand Victor's response, what Victor is contending is that until after we change the structures and institutions that produce committing crimes, then abolishing prisons will simply not be realizable. What we'll have to do as a necessary and sufficient condition is change. I'm hesitating to use the term capitalism because I don't want to scare my viewers. But until after we develop an alternative to that political economy, abolishing prisons will simply be a fantasy.
No, I think we need to just hold them accountable and redistribute the wealth. I mean, any profit that has been made at the expense of human beings needs to be redistributed.
Yeah,
I don't want them in prison necessarily. I mean, I think we need a society that's egalitarian and equal and fair.
yeah. It's a complex process in which the transformation at the level of prisons or uh, the penal system will go hand in hand with transformations in other spheres. And there are things that can be done in the short run. There are countries now where the prison system is more humane than it is in the United States. There was a film that Michael Moore made, Who Shall We Invade Next? He was getting inspiration, models from other countries, and looking especially at the prison systems in the Scandinavian country when he was in Norway, and showed a much more humane condition. I think what we have to realize at the base of this, and this is here we're talking about not necessarily yet being able to abolish prisons, but at least not making them as Noelle suggests, the kind of schools of crime that they are now, but taking seriously the theoretical commitment they have to rehabilitation, which implies creating communities in which there's a level of trust and a level of decency and respect with which people are treated, so that because I think what isn't realized enough is that just being confined, being separated from one's community, is punishment in itself. And in this country, there's unfortunately the culture that not only must you confine people, you must treat them with cruelty because they've earned it. All that they're sentenced to is confinement. They're not sentenced to a regimen in which they're being brutalized, which is what we have here.
Mm. Well, there are those hesitant political theorists who would offhand dismiss the idea of the abolition of slavery, convinced that there is a dark side to human nature that will always produce certain individuals who are going to do heinous crimes. And in order to accommodate that, we need prisons.
I think if you just look at the statistics, if you take guns out of this country, you'll get less murders. If you feed people, you'll get less burglaries. If you provide for health care, and that's just, you can say it's true from every single other country. It's the ways in which this country has treated its working class as disposable and a commodity that has created these conditions. It is unique. This country is frankly unique. And I think that needs to be acknowledged. It's not there, whether or not there are a certain percentage of people who are going to commit heinous crimes or crimes that are against of moral turpitude and otherwise. Yes, I'm sure that's true. And we should find ways to appropriately honor that in terms of like thinking about it and figuring it out and housing them. But as Victor just mentioned, the cruelty in prison, right? The extra cruelty, the rapes, the torture, the isolation, the brutality, the starvation, those don't just result in the prisoners suffering a great deal. They reverberate throughout the community. And I might also say, anyone connected with that, the guards, bring that same level of violence outside. If we don't, in addition, if we don't treat tuberculosis in prison, it's never going to go away. If we don't treat hepatitis C in prison, it is going to remain a killer, even though it's curable. So as a culture, we are going to face enormous consequences if we do not stop the level of torture that is happening in front of us, that we know happens. And I think it's on us to not fail in the face of that. Like, we have to speak our truths. We have to be loud. We have to be consistent, and we have to not be afraid to say what we really need and to say what we see. I will never, ever again censor myself. I will not. It's just too desperate a situation with the people that we know inside and too many.
We have about 15 minutes left, and I would like both of you to say what needs to be said to your viewers, so that to return to the center of the conversation, we can make Noel's incredible commitment and effort to defend Mumia for over 30 years to be a realizable possibility and not merely a pipe dream.
Oh no, he's getting out. You can be part of the train that's going to get him out. You should jump on right now because it's going to be an incredibly fun ride. But we are bringing Mumia Abu-Jamal home, and it will be historic. It'll be Nelson Mandela like. So if you want to join this movement, that's going to be winning. It's going to be really rough road from a lot of up and downs, a lot of roller coaster rides, but we are going to bring our political prisoners home, and including Mumia Abu-Jamal. So I think people should join and take a risk for your future. Stand up for what's right. Count on your community to support you. Build alternatives to the state. Don't rely on the state to take care of you.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely. I guess my other thing that I'd like to remind people of is that the scale of the crime that's being committed by those in power now, and I'm thinking of the support of the genocide in Palestine. They talk about charging people with supporting terrorism. I mean, if this isn't the support of terrorism, I don't know what is. So the the kind of crime that's committed at high places and the orientation towards all kinds of ill-gotten gains at the highest levels, and they project it down into the lower levels. And those who commit on a retail basis, as you put it, as one can put it, they get punished, and the ones who are responsible for the biggest crimes get away and are even venerated by a sector of the population, and that's the culture that we're sort of fighting against. And so it sort of seeps down to the lower economic levels of the society, and it's there also that there can be the reaction against it. And we have to hold out the vision of a transformation of this culture, and it's going to have to come partly through a critique of the institutions that perpetuate this kind of cruelty.
I think I'm going to leave it there for me because I think that's exactly right. I think that consciousness, that awareness, we all know it. We are seeing the genocide as it happens, supported by a client state of the U.S. in Israel's assaults against the Palestinian people. And it's in the face of that we have to just stand up and know that we're standing up for what we need in our future. And I have to ditch out because my battery is on 1 and I don't want to just lose you. But thank you so much for having us both on. I think I really learned some things from this conversation.
I thank you so much. And again, I commend and admire your efforts to bring a historic prisoner to the limelight of life.
You're welcome. My pleasure.